everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
And anime crossover saving the world starting as a fake hero. Volume 2 CH Chapter 58 to 65, The Harbor Town of Melon. Leaving Orio and traveling about 5 kilometers to the southwest, one arrives at a bustling harbor town named Melon. This town was built along the shores of a massive lake called Lake Lalag, which was so astonishingly vast that, at a glance, the water and sky blended together, creating the illusion of facing the open sea. The lake's surface shimmered with fragmented golden ripples under the morning sun, dotted with a few white sails in the distance. Flocks of birds darted between the masts, chirping, while the air was filled with a faint scent of water and dried fresh grass. Every year, countless merchant ships from all over the world travel via water into Lake Lalag, where they unload various rare goods before transporting them by land to Orio. The docks on both sides were piled high with crates of cargo. Sailors scurried back and forth carrying sacks, while merchants shouted at the top of their lungs to sell the seafood just unloaded from the ships. The entire harbor was filled with a busy and vibrant atmosphere. When the party from the Loki Familia arrived in Melon in the morning, they were immediately captivated by the town's unique local customs. Wow! So nostalgic! Tiona ran to the lakeside excitedly like a child, spreading her arms to feel the mist, which carried a faint salty scent. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, a brilliant smile blooming on her face. It's been years, but it seems like nothing has changed here at all. Even the fish stalls by the pier are in the same spots. Indeed. Tioni also wore a nostalgic smile. She stood beside her sister, her gaze sweeping over the familiar streets and buildings. Back then, we arrived at this harbor on a merchant ship before heading to Orio. We didn't know anything back then and found everything so novel. Eh? Miss Tiona and Miss Tioni, did you come by ship before? Lafia, who was following behind, asked curiously. Yes, we stayed in Melon for a while back then to earn travel expenses, and we did quite a bit of manual labor. Tioni answered with a smile, her eyes filled with memories. We moved cargo at the docks, helped fishing boats with their nets, and even washed dishes at restaurants. We did everything. Although those days were tough, thinking back on them now, they were actually quite interesting. Are you sure your memory is correct? Luca asked skeptically. How come I heard from Finn that you two fought your way from the south to the north, and were only reined in after arriving in Orio? The captain must have remembered wrong. Tioni said seriously, I have always been gentle and refined, which is why I fell in love with the captain, who is just as refined as I am. Sister, you are being just a bit too. Even Tiona couldn't bear to watch. The other women of the Loki Familia nearby looked like they wanted to laugh. Tioni's alias is Jungle Snake, and in the past, even if she wasn't a barbarian, she was certainly foul-mouthed. It was only after falling in love with Captain Finn that she began emulating Riveria's elegant demeanor, eventually becoming the way she is now. On both sides of the street, seafood shops filled with all sorts of bizarre aquatic products could be seen everywhere. Huge fish and shellfish, with strange tentacles and shells, were species that people living in Orio had never seen before. The girls curiously inspected the various stalls, marveling and occasionally letting out exclamations, which prompted the merchants to enthusiastically invite this group of lovely girls to try samples. Riveria, walking in the middle of the group, was pointing at a building in the distance, introducing the history of Melon to Ace Wallenstein beside her. Her dignified face wore a relaxed smile at this moment. Are you familiar with this place, Riveria? Do you come here often? Luca walked up to her side. I've been here a few times. Riveria nodded, her emerald eyes reflecting the shimmering lake water. I quite like it here. Looking at this boundless expanse of water always brings a sense of long-lost peace. In Orio, every day is filled with documents, meetings, and tactical discussions. Here, my mind finally gets a rest. As she spoke, Riveria sighed. Actually, I have always had a dream. She looked at the horizon where the water met the sky, her voice becoming somewhat distant, that is to cast off the red tape and constraints of being elven royalty and travel the world. To see unknown landscapes, to witness all the miracles I have never seen before, To feel the freedom that truly belongs to Riveria. And then? Luca added. Riveria shook her head helplessly, a hint of a smile appearing at the corner of her mouth. In the end, I was tricked by Loki, signed a contract, and settled down in Orio. Her thoughts began to drift. Riveria recalled the scene when she first joined the Loki Familia. When Finn joined the Familia, Loki gave him the promise of reviving the Paulum race and her absolute trust. And for her, Loki had also given an important promise: freedom. This promise was written into the contract. If one day Riveria decided to leave the Familia to pursue her dream of traveling the world, Loki could not, under any circumstances, prevent her departure. However, I don't know when that day will come. Riveria shook her head, her gaze falling on the companions walking ahead. Those young, vibrant figures appeared exceptionally vivid in the morning light. Perhaps I will leave when Finn, Gareth, and the others are too old to hold their weapons. Or, perhaps, when the dungeon in Orio can no longer satisfy my desire to explore the unknown. Hearing Riveria mention Finn, Tione immediately leaned in, cupping her cheeks, and said with a lovesick expression, "Ah. We've been separated for less than half a day, and I already miss the captain's heroic back. You are truly hopeless." Riveria sighed, rubbing her forehead helplessly. "When you get tired of all this, would you like to visit my homeland?" Luca looked at Riveria. There are different races, different landscapes, and different systems there. It will definitely satisfy your desire for the unknown. My homeland is indeed beautiful. Alice nodded. Come to think of it, I haven't smelled the air of the Hell continent for a long time. I look forward to it. Riveria agreed with a smile. Due to the nature of this investigation, all the members Loki brought were female. As the elites of Orario's strongest familia, these girls were not only powerful but also possessed stunning appearances, a group of female adventurers, each with her own unique charm. Walking on the streets of Melon, they formed a beautiful sight that firmly captured the attention of all passers-by. Amidst the flock of beauties, the only male stood out as particularly out of place. Never mind the passers-by, even the female members of the group were extremely curious as to why Luca, the only male, had been included in this operation. They had exchanged many glances and guesses in private, but out of respect for Luca's current status as a high-ranking executive, no one was quite comfortable asking him directly. However, there was always one person who was thick-skinned and didn't care about rules at all. "Hey, Luca." Tiona leaned in front of Luca, looking him up and down in confusion, her amber eyes filled with curiosity. "Why are you the only man on this investigation mission? Isn't that just too strange?" As she spoke, Tiona's gaze became strange. She stroked her chin, her eyes tracking down from Luca's face, staring straight at a certain unspeakable area, and said something shocking. "Could it be that you are actually—" "Shut up." Before Tiona could finish that terrible sentence, Luca reached out, annoyed, and covered her wandering eyes and mouth with his hand. Feeling the suddenly gossipy and strange gazes of the surrounding female members, Luca felt his scalp tingle. He quickly cleared his throat and explained loudly, "Ahem. I came to Melon for other classified missions assigned by Finn. It just happened that I departed on the same day as Loki's party, so I'm just tagging along. There is absolutely no strange reason for this." The surrounding chatter quieted down a bit. Luca was glad he explained quickly enough. With the gossiping ability of these girls, if he had hesitated for even 5 seconds, by tomorrow, rumors like the radiant star of the Loki Familia is actually a tomboy in disguise would probably be spreading all over the streets of Orio. Hurry up, you slowpokes." Loki, walking at the front of the group, turned back and waved to urge everyone on. She was exceptionally excited today. This is when the sun is hottest, the perfect time for photosynthesis. Hurry up and catch up. Loki seemed very suspicious today. She carried a huge black bag on her back, which was bulging, and no one knew what was inside. Earlier, when Luca saw her struggling, he offered to help her carry it, but Loki had waved him off as if he were a thief, with an expression that said, "You want to peek at my treasures." Under Loki's urging, the group quickened their pace and arrived at the busiest harbor area of Melon. It was bustling with people, even livelier than the streets they had passed earlier. Elves, demi-humans, and dwarves, merchants and sailors of all races shuttled across the docks, moving cargo. Shouts, the clanging of metal, and the lapping of waves intertwined. The air was filled with the scent of fish, the piney smell of wooden barrels, and the aroma of grease wafting from a distant grilled fish stall. In a corner of the docks, Loki walked toward a man who was carrying a huge fishing net, bare-chested, revealing strong muscles. The man had short hair, slightly messy from the sea breeze, and his skin was tanned to a healthy bronze. His muscles were well-defined, clearly the mark of someone who had engaged in manual labor for years. Although he was dressed like an ordinary fisherman, he exuded the unique aura that only a god possesses. Yo! Jord. Loki walked up and patted the man on the back. Loki? The god known as Jord turned his head. When he saw Loki, he was visibly stunned, and a flash of surprise crossed his eyes. He put down the fishing net on his shoulder and looked Loki up and down. It's been about 10 years since we last met, right? Why did you come to Melon? I remember you being the type of lazybones who would rather lie down than sit. Hee, I came specially to visit you. Loki grinned. Cut the crap. I don't believe a single punctuation mark of your nonsense. Jord mercilessly debunked her. Riveria also walked up and politely greeted Jord. The two were clearly old acquaintances. Judging by the tone of their conversation, they had likely known each other for many years. Next, Riveria turned to introduce him to Luca. This is the god Jord. His familia is responsible for catching aquatic products from Lake Lalag and the outside ocean, and selling them all over the world. She paused, then added, almost all the seafood on the market in Orio comes from their hands. It can be said that, like the Demeter familia which manages agriculture, the Jord familia is one of the core familia supporting the food supply for all of Orio. Hearing Riveria's introduction, Jord smiled modestly and waved his hand. Not at all, Riveria, you are exaggerating. We just live off the water, it's nothing special. Immediately after, his gaze fell on Luca, and a flash of admiration crossed his eyes. This must be the radiant star who has recently become famous in Orio, right? Truly extraordinary presence. I have heard countless stories about you even here in Melon. You are too kind. Luca shook his head. After the pleasantries, Jord glanced at the massive, all-female lineup behind Loki and frowned with some confusion. Loki, do you have something important to do by bringing so many people to Melon? This formation doesn't look like you're just here to visit an old friend. Shoo. Loki looked left and right, then pulled Jord aside and lowered her voice. She asked mysteriously, hey, you're familiar with this area, tell me quickly, is there any secluded, uninhabited beach nearby where no outsiders will disturb us? Hearing this question, Jord was stunned for a moment. He glanced at the group of young and beautiful female members, then looked at the suspicious large black bag on Loki's back. Afterward, he sighed helplessly. As a god who has lived for countless years, he instantly guessed what that old pervert Loki wanted to do. Follow the harbor east for 3 kilometers, and there is a small bay blocked by reefs. The water is shallow and the sand is fine, nobody usually goes there. Jord rubbed his temples, feeling tired, but still told Loki the location. Standing not far away, Luca, although he didn't intentionally eavesdrop, still had his keen hearing catch the conversation between the two clearly. Luca. Chapter 59, the classic swimsuit episode. Led by Loki, the group traveled through the dense forest along the lake and climbed over a gentle hillside. When the view suddenly opened up, a vast, pure white beach, glistening brilliantly under the sunlight, struck their eyes. The azure lake water gently lapped against the shore, and a breeze blew by, carrying the refreshing scent of nature. Wow! What a beautiful place! The girls exclaimed one after another. What surprised everyone even more was that this wide, stunningly beautiful beach was completely empty, with only their Loki familia group present. Yes. Loki, walking at the very front, punched the air excitedly, her face plastered with a lecherous grin that screamed, my plan is a success. However, before Loki could enjoy it for too long, a cold voice echoed faintly in her ear. Alice stood with her arms crossed, looking at her expressionlessly. The scenery is indeed nice. But didn't you say there would be a grand seafood feast here? Where is the food? Facing Alice's murderous gaze, Loki laughed sheepishly. Oh, don't be so impatient, little Alice. Haste makes waste. As she spoke, Loki couldn't wait to put down the heavy black bag on her back and unzip it. There will definitely be a seafood feast, but before that. Tada! Look at what I prepared for you all. As the bag opened, colorful fabrics of various styles were revealed. This is. Lafia leaned over curiously. That's right. It's swimsuits. Loki proudly put her hands on her hips. I spent a fortune to have these amazing swimsuits custom-made according to each of your figures. Come on, ladies. Let's enjoy a swim first, and when we're tired, we'll eat the feast. The scene fell into a brief, dead silence. I really shouldn't have believed your nonsense. Violent anger ignited in Alice's eyes instantly. For the sake of this so-called seafood feast, she had walked the entire morning on an empty stomach. And this red-haired, flat-chested woman was actually telling her that they had to change into clothes with only 2 scraps of fabric to play in the water? Unforgivable. Bang! Amidst everyone's horrified gazes, Alice delivered a crisp, clean uppercut, slamming it hard into Loki's chin. Loki didn't even have time to scream, her entire body flew toward the distant lake like a cannonball. Splash! 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 Loki's body skipped smoothly across the water's surface, just like skipping stones, drifting 10 times before sinking into the water with a glug. Luca sighed helplessly. With a flash of movement, he fished the unconscious Loki out of the water and casually tossed her under a tree by the beach. Watching the miserable state of their god who had been instantly defeated, everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to do for a moment. The investigation mission they had agreed upon was now stalled, as even the god leading the team had been knocked out. Ahem. At this awkward moment, Riveria gave a light cough. As a member of the elven royalty, she always had to maintain the image of a dignified and solemn elder within the familia. But now, looking at this stunningly beautiful beach, a thought arose in her heart to let go of her burdens and hang out and play with everyone like a normal girl. Since we're already here, and Loki really did prepare these. Riveria looked at the bag of swimsuits and suggested with a slightly flushed face, everyone, go ahead and change into them to play for a while. Once Loki wakes up, we will proceed with the investigation of the underwater passage. Hearing the vice captain say this, the girls, who were already tempted, cheered immediately. They ran to the bag, picked out the swimsuits with their names on them, and ran behind the distant rocks to change. A few minutes later, when Riveria awkwardly walked out from behind the rocks, her face turned red to the roots of her ears as she looked at the revealing dark green bikini she was wearing. That bastard Loki, she actually ordered such skimpy styles. Riveria cursed through gritted teeth in her heart. But since she was the one who took the lead in letting everyone change into swimsuits, she had to maintain a calm facade even if she had to grit her teeth. Soon, the other girls also walked out one after another in their swimsuits. It would have been fine if only women were present, but the key was, there was still one dazzling male standing on this beach. Ugh. Lafia, wearing a cute white 2-piece swimsuit, covered her chest tightly with both hands, hiding behind Alicia with a face full of redness. Just thinking about being seen by Luca in this outfit made her ears blush to the point of bleeding. And Line, as a healer, was even more ashamed and couldn't even lift her head. She was wearing a pink string bikini that Loki had specially chosen for her to highlight her figure. Her small hands were twisting uneasily in front of her, and she made a sound as soft as a mosquito. Lord Loki is too much, how could anyone be embarrassed enough to wear these kinds of clothes out? Even the usually cheerful mage Alicia was hugging her arms across her chest, her face slightly red as she looked away, not daring to make any eye contact with Luca in the distance. Feeling the girls' shy and uncomfortable gazes, Luca spoke, since everyone wants to play, I'll go to the rocks a bit further away to catch some fresh seafood. I'll make lunch for everyone. Luca turned to leave, intending to give them some private space. Wait. Luca. Just then, Tiona, who had already changed into a bikini, ran over openly. Her other hand was pulling Ace Wallenstein, who was fidgeting and wanted to bury her head in the sand. Tiona naturally placed her hand on Luca's shoulder and said with a smile, "Why go catch seafood? That's for later. Since we're at the beach, you should change too, Luca. Come play beach volleyball with me later. And by the way, teach Ace Wallenstein how to swim." Ace Wallenstein, who was named, was wearing a pure white one-piece swimsuit. Hearing Tiona's words, her delicate face turned bright red instantly. She kept her head down, staring fixedly at her toes, not daring to look up at Luca at all. Seeing Tiona so candid, and the other girls, though shy, also showing anticipation in their eyes, Luca didn't act coy and walk away. "Alright, wait for me a moment." Luca walked aside, quickly changed into a simple pair of black swim trunks, and walked back. He took a generous look at Ace Wallenstein in her pure white swimsuit and the wild beauty of Tiona, and praised them sincerely. "This outfit suits you both very well, you look beautiful." Hearing Luca's compliment, Ace Wallenstein buried her head even lower and muttered weakly, "Thank you." Tiona, on the other hand, pulled at the edge of her swimsuit carelessly and complained, "It's pretty, sure, but I feel like it's not as good as the clothes I usually wear." Meanwhile, on a beach chair not far away, Alice had also changed into a swimsuit at some point and was lying there comfortably sunbathing with sunglasses on. Hearing Luca's words, she added, "We can play volleyball, but the seafood feast at noon is a must. I want to eat those crabs that are bigger than a face." Luca nodded, then was dragged onto the beach by Tiona, who set up a simple net using branches and vines. "Take this." Tiona jumped high excitedly and spiked the volleyball with all her might. Bang! Luca easily took a step and used one hand to perfectly receive the cannonball-like volleyball, then spiked it back into the blind spot of Tiona's defense with precision. Ah! Again! The unyielding Tiona pulled Tioni and Lafia to form a three-person team, trying to get her revenge in beach volleyball. Half an hour later, Tiona's team had gathered almost all the women of the Loki familia. But no matter how they coordinated or spiked, Luca was like a wall on the other side, easily hitting every ball back. "No more, no more." Tiona sat on the sand in frustration, panting and waving her hand, "You're so flawless even at volleyball, it's no fun. Ace Wallenstein, let's go play in the water." Tiona pulled Ace Wallenstein to the lakeside. However, the Sword Princess, who was always courageous on the battlefield, stood in the water up to her ankles and refused to take another step forward. "Ace Wallenstein, what's wrong?" Luca, who had followed, asked with some confusion. "Ace Wallenstein is a serious non-swimmer." Tiona ruthlessly exposed her secret, then winked at Luca. Luca winked back. The two tacitly grabbed Ace Wallenstein from the left and right and forcibly dragged her into the lake. Wait a minute. Ace Wallenstein tried to struggle in a panic. But as soon as the two let go, glug, glug. Ace Wallenstein, who had been standing straight just a moment ago, sank straight to the bottom of the water like a heavy stone, without even a splash. "Hey!" Luca was startled and quickly reached into the water, fishing out the choking Ace Wallenstein. Watching Ace Wallenstein coughing miserably in his arms, Luca looked at Tiona speechlessly. Who exactly taught her to swim before? How can she not even know the most basic breath-holding? It seems it was Riveria who taught her? Tiona scratched her head, but I don't know exactly what happened. Luca looked down and asked Ace Wallenstein, "How did Riveria teach you?" Ace Wallenstein blinked blankly, her golden hair sticking to her forehead. I have absolutely no remembrance of learning to swim." Luca looked in shock at Riveria, who was resting with her eyes closed on a beach chair in the distance. To be able to teach someone to the point where they sealed their own remembrance, what on earth did Riveria do? "Forget it, I'll teach you. Let's start with relaxing your body." For the next half hour, Luca patiently supported Ace Wallenstein's waist, trying to teach her the most basic doggy paddle. However, as soon as Ace Wallenstein's feet left the lake bottom, her muscles stiffened instantly. She hugged Luca's arm and neck tightly like an octopus, and couldn't be pried off no matter what. Forget it, give up. Looking at Ace Wallenstein, who was tightly wrapped around him and refused to let go, Luca sighed helplessly. Since lunchtime was approaching anyway, he simply carried this large starfish back to the shore. Afterward, Luca efficiently dived into the deep water and reef area. In less than half an hour, he had skillfully started a fire on the beach and prepared a large table full of rich seafood barbecue and seafood soup. Wow! It smells so good. The girls, tired from playing, gathered around one after another. After tasting the first bite, everyone was conquered by Luca's superb culinary skills. While enjoying the food, girls with thin skins like Lafia and Line would always let their eyes drift toward Luca, who was grilling fish, from time to time. Looking at his exposed, perfectly lined, sturdy upper body, their cheeks would always heat up uncontrollably. But whenever Luca looked up, they would turn their eyes away in a panic like startled rabbits, pretending to look at the scenery in the distance. Just as everyone was satisfied and had gone behind the rocks to change back into the clothes they arrived in, Loki, who had been unconscious under the coconut tree, finally woke up in a daze. Slurp. She smelled the extremely rich aroma of seafood in the air, opened her eyes, and found that only a pile of clean fish bones and crab shells remained on the beach, along with the familia girls who were already fully dressed. Loki froze for a full 3 seconds. Aha! She wailed miserably, rolling and freaking out on the beach. I haven't eaten the seafood feast made by Luca yet. I haven't seen you all in swimsuits yet. I don't want to live anymore. Chapter 60, Callie. Chapter 60, Callie. Sunlight bathed the azure sea of Melon, shimmering with golden specks that danced with the waves. In the distance, seabirds weaved between masts, emitting long cries that mingled with the sound of waves crashing against the reefs. After a relaxing and enjoyable beach break, the members of the Loki familia shed their playful laziness and changed back into their practical gear. Swimsuits were packed away, wet hair was casually tied up, and everyone's face bore a satisfied, relaxed expression. As the acting captain, Luca stood by the shore, his gaze fixed on the seemingly calm Lake Rolog. The lake surface shimmered with tiny lights under the sun, like a giant silver mirror reflecting the blue sky and white clouds. He turned and issued instructions. Tioni, the investigation of the underwater passage is up to you too. Be careful, and if you find anything unusual, retreat immediately. Don't engage in prolonged combat. Leave it to us, Luca. Tiona patted her chest, making a crisp sound. These Amazon twins possessed a rare diving development ability, and the swimsuits they wore were made of precious Narcissus Spirit Guard cloth. The fabric was as light as a cicada's wing, yet it could significantly reduce water pressure, while also providing ample defense and flexibility underwater. Entrusting them with this task was the most suitable choice. Take these, girls. Loki rummaged through her enormous satchel, which seemed to hold everything, and pulled out 2 uniquely shaped underwater combat weapons, handing them to the sisters. There might be man-eating flowers that slipped through the cracks below. Take these for self-defense. Thanks, Loki. Tiona took the weapons, weighed them in her hands, and nodded in satisfaction. Taking the weapons, the 2 sisters, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, leaped into the lake. Water splashed up and fell, leaving only expanding ripples that quickly faded into calm. The underwater world presented a serene, deep blue. Sunlight refracted through the water's surface, casting dappled light and shadow that swayed at the bottom. Colorful schools of fish weaved around, some with long trailing fins, others glowing with fluorescent spots, forming a magnificent underwater painting. Tiona curiously observed the splendid seascape she hadn't seen in a long time, her gaze unconsciously drawn to a glowing fish with long trailing fins. She was so absorbed that she unconsciously swayed her body and followed it, completely forgetting the mission at hand. Dong. A crisp hand chop landed precisely on Tiona's head. Tiona blew a string of bubbles, clutching her head, and looked at her sister beside her with a wronged expression. Tioni glared at her in annoyance, then pointed a finger at the bottomless dark abyss below, then at her own eyes, and finally at Tiona, meaning, concentrate, look down. Tiona stuck out her tongue, quickly composed herself, and followed closely behind her sister, continuing to dive. As they descended deeper, the surrounding light gradually dimmed, and the water temperature became bone-chilling. Sunlight could no longer penetrate the heavy water, leaving only a profound, inky blue all around. After swimming for an unknown period, when their feet finally touched the soft mud at the bottom of the lake, a colossal circular seal suddenly appeared in their sight. It was a giant gap, dozens of meters in diameter, tilted on the underwater slope, its edges covered with intricate ancient runes. The gap was currently sealed by a faintly glowing transparent great lid, resembling an inverted giant bowl. Its surface flowed with a light blue magical aura, completely isolating the darkness within. The two raised their guard and slowly approached the seal. When they saw the scene inside the lid, even the battle-hardened sisters couldn't help but freeze for a moment, their hearts skipping a beat. Within the seal, a gigantic, suffocating monster skeleton lay quietly dormant. The skeleton exuded a chilling pressure. It had a monstrous, dragon-like head, even as mere bones, the contours of its structure still conveyed a primal ferocity. Its body, winding endlessly like a snake, stretched into the depths of the darkness, seemingly without end. And its enormous fins, like wings that blotted out the sky, had their skeletal framework spread wide. Even as just bones, one could still imagine their magnificent sight when soaring through the sea. Before they set off, Loki had told them that the object serving as this seal was one of the 3 legendary dungeon quests, the Sea Overlord, Leviathan, once jointly subjugated by the Hera Familia and the Zeus Familia. Even as a mere skeleton, the violent pressure that transcended ages still seeped through the seal, making the surrounding seawater feel stagnant and heavy. The two sisters suppressed the shock in their hearts and their instinctive shivers, carefully inspecting the giant lid all around. There were no signs of damage. Tiona used gestures to convey information to her sister. After confirming the seal was intact, the two decided to return to the surface to report. They kicked their legs, swimming upwards towards the increasingly close light above. However, just as they were about to reach the lake surface, several distorted shadows suddenly writhed in the water above. Man-eating flowers. The sisters' pupils constricted. Through the water, they vaguely saw an unsuspecting large ship moored on the lake's surface, and 2 massive man-eating flowers were silently attacking the vessel, brandishing tentacles covered in barbs. Oh no! Tioni and Tiona put all their strength into furiously kicking their legs, swimming towards the surface. But the distance was too great. They could clearly see the thick tentacles already raised high, about to smash the fragile wooden hull. Just at this critical moment. Boom! Above the water, a pure white light, like the first lightning bolt tearing through the sky in a summer rain, suddenly flashed. The light was too fast to react to, and so sharp it seemed capable of cutting through anything. The 2 giant man-eating flowers that had just been writhing instantly turned into scattered ashes. Luca, at some unknown point, had stepped onto the turbulent lake surface, his red cape gently fluttering behind him, his gaze calmly fixed on the large ship. The moment the man-eating flowers were killed, an Amazonian woman, who had been about to make a move by the ship's rail, abruptly stopped. She had long, silver-brown hair that gleamed in the sunlight. Explosive muscle lines rippled on her bare arms and shoulders, containing deadly power. She wore a light veil over her face, covering the lower half, revealing only a pair of sharp eyes. At this moment, she was looking at Luca, who stood proudly on the water, with great interest, even a hint of fanaticism. Whoosh! Tiona burst out of the water, gasping for air, water droplets sliding from her hair and cheeks. Her gaze swept over the large ship, which had distinct Amazonian features. The bow was carved with a totem of some fierce beast, rows of bone decorations hung from the gunnels, and the cabin was covered with brightly colored fabrics. She was struck by lightning, exclaiming in disbelief. Back? Back? Tioni, who surfaced right after, also looked up in shock at the mention. She shook her wet hair, her gaze fixed on the familiar figure on the ship, long silver-brown hair, a veiled Amazonian woman. It was the person from her remembrance. She shook her wet hair, her gaze fixed on the familiar figure on the ship, long silver-brown hair, a veiled Amazonian woman, it was the person from her remembrance. Just then, accompanied by a series of crisp footsteps, a small figure emerged from the shadows of the ship's cabin. It was a girl with reddish-brown skin, small in stature like a young child. Her skin had a healthy wheat color, gleaming slightly in the sunlight, and she wore a fierce fanged mask on her face, forming a stark contrast with her petite figure. However, what was utterly inconsistent with her small stature was the terrifying aura she exuded, like a dormant volcano, with magma capable of devouring everything surging beneath a calm sea surface. This was a god. Callie. Tiona stared intently at her, calling out the name that had left a deep impression in their childhood remembrance. The large ship carrying the members of the battle nation Turskra slowly sailed into the port and moored at the shore. Tione leaped out of the water, her muscles tense. Her gaze locked onto the small figure at the ship's bow, her voice cold. "Callie, why are you here?" Facing Tione's hostile questioning, Callie casually waved her small hand, her voice from behind the mask sounding nonchalant. "Don't be so tense, we're just here for sightseeing. I heard the fish and melon are delicious, so we came to take a look." Sightseeing? Only a ghost would believe that the battle maniacs from the battle nation were here for sightseeing. The two sisters stood as if facing a formidable enemy, unconsciously adopting a battle stance. Callie ignored their vigilance, her gaze scanning Tione up and down. Her eyes swept from Tione's head to her toes, and a satisfied chuckle came from behind the mask. "Tione, you've grown quite a bit, and become more womanly. Your figure is better than before, too. It seems you're doing well in Oreo." Then, her gaze slowly shifted to Tiona beside her. Her eyes lingered on the other's flat chest for a moment, and Callie feigned regret with a sigh, shaking her head. "As for you, Tiona, what a pity, after all these years, you haven't grown at all. Still so flat. You bastard." Veins instantly bulged on Tiona's forehead. She clenched her fists, about to rush onto the ship, but Tione beside her held her arm tightly. "Let go of me, big sister. Today, I'm going to show her what I'm capable of. See if I've grown or not." "Calm down, Tiona." Looking at the familiar lively scene before her, Callie's laughter grew even more joyful. "Your current reputation has even reached me, far away in the battle nation." Callie's voice held a playful tone. "I never thought you two would achieve this level of growth after leaving Turskra. It seems Oreo truly is a good place." She tilted her head. "Speaking of which, where's your patron god now? Since you're here, shouldn't you at least say hello? I'm their guardian now." "What do you want, shorty number 2? A defiant voice came from the shore. Loki strode out from among the Loki Familia members, her vermilion eyes directly meeting Callie's, showing no sign of backing down. Callie paused slightly, her gaze falling on Loki's chest, which was as flat as a washboard. Her eyes behind the mask first blinked, then widened as if she had seen something incredible. The next second, Callie suddenly clutched her stomach and burst into an unladylike fit of laughter, drawing sidelong glances from the surrounding Amazonian members. "Ha ha 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 ha. I'm dying of laughter." Callie laughed so hard she could barely stand upright, one hand on the ship's rail, the other pointing at Loki. "This is the first time I've seen a woman flatter than Tiona. Does your Loki Familia specialize in recruiting flat-chested people?" The air around them seemed to solidify in that instant. Veins on Loki's forehead bulged visibly. She rolled up her sleeves and stomped forward, ready to charge. "You damn shorty. Today I'm going to tear that stinking mouth of yours apart." "Calm down, Loki." Luca had returned to the shore. He held the flailing Loki by the back of her collar with one hand. Loki waved her arms and legs in the air, but couldn't escape his iron-like grip. Luca raised his eyes, looking past the crowd, directly meeting the gaze of the battle nation's god. Callie's laughter faltered slightly. The oppressive feeling that the Callie Familia had brought into the air instantly vanished with that one look. "What a handsome man." Callie's gaze fell on Luca, her eyes behind the mask flashing with undisguised appreciation. She said in a matter-of-fact tone, "I permit you to be my lover." "Mind your mouth." A cold voice rang out from the crowd. Alice stepped out, her golden eyes calmly observing Callie. She didn't release any aura, yet the Amazonian warriors behind Callie, who had been itching for a fight, all took half a step back in unison. "The next time I hear that sentence, I will tear your mouth apart," Alice said coldly. "Alice, don't lose face, go for it." Loki fanned the flames from the side. Though still held by Luca's collar, her eyes sparkled with excitement. "I support you." Callie gave Alice a deep look, then, after a moment, she withdrew her gaze. "Let's go." Callie turned and walked towards the ship's cabin. Although the Amazonian warriors still curiously peeked at the silver-haired woman on the shore, guessing her identity, they followed closely behind their patron god, filing into the cabin. The large ship slowly departed from the dock, heading towards the center of the lake. On the shore, Luca finally released his grip on Loki's collar. After landing, Loki was still waving her fists at the departing ship. "Don't let me see you again, shorty. Otherwise, I'll tear off your mask and throw it like a frisbee." Luca ignored Loki's shouting. His gaze fell on the departing ship, and he narrowed his eyes slightly. "Let's go back first," Luca said. "We still have a lot to discuss regarding the underwater seal." Chapter 61, Battle Nation. Night fell, and the sea breeze of Melon, carrying its characteristic briny scent, blew into the inn entirely rented out by the Loki Familia. The members of the Loki Familia were gathered together, but the atmosphere was not as relaxed as it had been on the beach during the day. "I'll give you a rough rundown about those guys from earlier today." Loki sat cross-legged on the tatami mat and scratched her head. "That second shorty is Callie, the deity who rules the battle nation Talskura. Just like the kingdom of Rakia led by the war god Ares, it's a standard state-affiliated familia. Talskura is located on a peninsula far to the southeast of Orario. It's an isolated and primitive country." Loki paused. "This country is immersed in slaughter and blood day and night. Because it's so isolated, my intelligence on it is very limited, but I truly didn't expect their top-tier combat strength to have reached this level." The two Amazons following behind Callie are Aljana Galafu and Back Galafu, the leaders of the Callie Familia. Loki turned to look at Luca, who was leaning back in a chair, and asked, "Luca, with your insight, can you tell what level those two sisters are currently?" "Both of them are level 6. Luca took a sip of tea and gave the answer. As soon as these words were spoken, a low murmur broke out in the room. Riveria frowned slightly and said, "There were indeed rumors circulating from the guild about the two of them promoting to level 6, but because it happened outside of Orario, none of us believed it. I didn't expect it to actually be true." "That's a bit strange, isn't it?" Alice, who had been listening all along, showed a trace of curiosity on her face. For adventurers to cross the barrier of levels, besides proficiency, the most important thing is to achieve a great achievement, right? There are no dungeons outside of Orario, so where exactly did they get the great achievements needed to promote to level 6? From the Dragon Valley? Lafia asked curiously. The room fell into a brief, deathly silence. Riveria was silent for a long time before she said, "It is slaughter, a ritual unique to the battle nation." Meeting the confused gazes of the younger generation, Riveria closed her eyes. "Level 1 fights level 1, level 2 fights level 2. It's just like raising goo. Only those who survive life and death struggles against their peers, stepping over the corpses and blood of their companions, can use that as a great achievement to cross the dead land and gain the qualifications to level up." As her voice trailed off, the younger generation of the Loki Familia fell completely silent. Whether it was Lafia, Line, or Alicia, most of them had only joined the Familia after the end of the darkest period of Orario, the Evil's era. They had subjugated countless hideous monsters in the dungeon, but in other words, they had never truly taken a human life. The bloody law of mutual slaughter in the battle nation was too shocking for them. Just as the atmosphere in the room was suppressed to the extreme and the younger generation was still immersed in shock, an uncontrollable roar suddenly erupted from outside the balcony. "How much longer are you going to be this naive, you idiot?" With a dull thud, it sounded as if something heavy had been slammed hard against the wall. Everyone was startled and turned to look. They saw that outside the glass door of the balcony, Tione was clutching her sister's collar tightly with one hand, pressing Tiona against the wall. Her originally beautiful face was now twisted with anger, and her eyes were bloodshot with a dangerous glint. "Sister, calm down first. Let go, the clothes are going to tear." Although Tiona was pressed against the wall, she did not fight back, only trying to persuade her earnestly. "We have a mission right now, let's go back and report the important business to Luca, okay?" "Important business? Is there anything more important right now than those lunatics suddenly running to Melon?" Tione gritted her teeth, her voice filled with a chilling violence. "Didn't you see the look in that woman Aljana's eyes? She looked at us like we were prey fattened up and ready to be slaughtered." "Oh, you're just overthinking it." Tiona tried to pry her sister's fingers off, attempting to break free. "Anyway, it has nothing to do with us. We've been away from Telskura for so long, and we're with the Loki Familia now. Even if she wants to go crazy, she can't just start fighting in the middle of the street." "You hopeless idiot." Tione was completely enraged. She violently flung Tiona away and slammed her fist hard against the metal railing nearby. Accompanied by the screeching sound of twisting metal, a dent was forcefully smashed into the thick railing. What else is in the heads of those guys besides slaughter and blood? How could they possibly have good intentions toward us? Callie bringing them all the way to Melon is definitely aimed at us. They want to use our lives to fulfill their great achievements. Heavy breathing echoed on the balcony, and Tione's muscles were tense to the limit. The sliding door of the balcony was violently pulled open with a clatter, and the glass even let out an unbearable groan under the immense force. Tione, in an extremely foul mood and completely enraged, walked into the room with a grim face, intending to leave immediately. "Wait a moment, Tione." A tall, upright figure blocked her path. Luca looked at the Amazon on the verge of losing control in front of him. "Report the situation of the underwater seal before you leave." "Get lost." Tione, completely overtaken by her emotions, couldn't listen to anything. Alice, seeing this, raised her eyebrows with some amusement. As for Luca, looking at Tione, who was clawing and snarling and had completely lost her reason, a strong sense of déjà vu suddenly welled up in his heart. This style of not listening to reason and completely losing control once her emotions flared up, was exactly the same as those troublesome monster girls in the Monster Girl world. When dealing with someone in this state, reasoning with them was useless. "Calm down." Luca's voice remained flat. "Put the Battle Nation matter aside for now. Right now, let's talk about the seal. I told you to get lost, can't you understand?" Having her path blocked, Tione completely exploded. The string of reason snapped completely. She swung her fist, bringing with it a terrifying whistling sound that tore through the air, and smashed it hard toward Luca's cheek. However, the next moment. Bang! A dull sound of flesh colliding exploded in the room. Tione's fist stopped in midair. Her eyes bulged suddenly, her pupils contracted violently, and a large amount of saliva spilled from her slightly open mouth. Luca, with a terrifying speed that others couldn't even see, struck after but arrived first, landing a precise and perfectly controlled straight punch solidly into Tione's abdomen. Ugh! This punch almost knocked Tione unconscious directly. She curled up like a boiled shrimp, clutching her stomach and kneeling on the ground in pain, her mind completely blank. The unreasonable irritability and anger from just a moment ago were instantly wiped out in the face of physical pain. Everyone in the room was so frightened by this sudden violent suppression that they didn't dare to breathe, and the atmosphere instantly froze. Loki looked around awkwardly, pretending to be looking at the texture of the ceiling, not daring to intervene in the discipline of this acting captain. Hearing the commotion, Tiona carefully poked half her head out from the balcony. When she saw her usually fierce sister clutching her stomach and kneeling before Luca, rolling her eyes, she shivered in fright and hurriedly raised her hands high, shouting, "Luca! You can't hit me after hitting my sister. I'm a good girl." Her statement slightly eased the frozen atmosphere in the room. Luca looked down at Tione, who was kneeling on the ground, his tone unchanged. "I can understand your impatient mood. Are you calm now? Then say it again. Put the Battle Nation matter aside for now. Report the situation of the underwater seal. Having received a dose of unadulterated physical persuasion, Tioni was completely tamed. She clutched her aching abdomen and took a few deep breaths. Although her face was still pale, the irritability in her eyes had completely faded away. Yes. Tioni glanced at Luca with some awe and reported obediently, "We found that huge lid at the bottom of the water. It is indeed the remains of the Leviathan inside. We checked it carefully, and the seal is completely intact, with no traces of damage." After listening, Luca touched his chin thoughtfully. Completely intact, yet a man-eating flower appeared on the surface of the lake. Luca pondered for a moment, then looked up and scanned everyone, issuing instructions. Tomorrow morning, everyone spread out and go into the town to inquire about information regarding the man-eating flower. He looked at the deep night outside the window and said, "A man-eating flower is not some weak monster that can be easily ignored. Since 2 of them already ran to the surface of the lake today to attack ships, it's impossible for there to be no rumors leaking out." Chapter 62, Investigation. The morning sun dispersed the mist over the sea, and the town of Melon welcomed a new day. Golden light spilled across the sparkling lake, casting a warm outline over the sails of distant fishing boats. Seabirds circled and chirped between the masts, while vendors at the dock began to display their fresh catch. The air was filled with the faint scent of the sea and the aroma of baked goods. Following the deployment plan Luca had set out last night, the entire Loki familia mobilized. They dispersed into every corner of the town, inquiring with local residents, fishermen, and passing merchants about the man-eating flower. The monster could not have appeared out of thin air. Someone must have seen or heard something. However, after an entire morning passed, the results were minimal. Most of the residents displayed an attitude of complete ignorance regarding yesterday's man-eating flower monster. Some waved their hands, saying they hadn't seen anything, while others wore confused expressions and asked in return, "What man-eating flower?" The fishermen who made their living on the lake for years were even more consistent in their accounts. The lake had always been calm, and they had never seen any strange monsters. This overly unified response, instead, made Luca feel a hint of something unusual. Meanwhile, Loki arrived at the dock area alone. With her hands in her pockets and humming an unknown tune, she found the sea god NJRR, who was busy directing workers to move cargo. NJRR was shirtless, his bronze skin glistening with sweat in the sunlight as he hoisted a heavy crate onto his shoulder. "Yo, NJRR, busy?" Loki walked up to him swaggeringly, her hands behind her head. "Do you have any clues about the 2 man-eating flowers from yesterday? After all, you're the local boss here, you must know something, right?" NJRR stopped his work, set the wooden crate aside, and straightened up to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He glanced at Loki and shook his head. "Don't ask me. This town has always been peaceful. We only found out that such a monster was on the lake yesterday when you guys made such a big commotion. Before that, we hadn't even seen a shadow of it. TCH, useless. As the local boss, you don't know anything." Loki curled her lip in disdain. Then, she changed the subject, narrowing her eyes as she asked, "So, is the relationship between your familia and the Adventurers Guild still as tense as ever?" Upon hearing the word Adventurers Guild, the expression on NJRR's face stiffened. He hoisted a heavy wooden crate, turned his back to Loki, and his tone was filled with undisguised complaint and irritation. "Same as always. Those guys are simply insatiable. Not only do they levy heavy taxes on us, but they also constantly force us to do odd jobs completely unrelated to our familia, under the pretense that this is the duty your familia must fulfill. It's infuriating. We aren't even considered an official familia of Orario, so why should we have to put up with their attitude?" Loki looked at NJRR's broad back thoughtfully and nodded in understanding. In regions outside of Orario, the friction between the Adventurers Guild branches and local factions was often more intense than within the city. "Why don't you go ask the Adventurers Guild branch?" NJRR suggested without turning his head. "Maybe they have some internal intelligence. After all, Those guys sit in their offices all day, they should know something we don't. No need. Loki paused, a smirk curling the corner of her mouth. We've already sent people to the Adventurers Guild. At the same time, at the Melon Adventurers Guild branch. This was a 2-story stone building located in the center of the town, with the Adventurers Guild emblem hanging above the entrance, and adventurers entering and exiting from time to time. The interior furnishings of the branch were much simpler than the Oreo headquarters, consisting only of a few old long tables and a wooden counter, with a few yellowed maps of the sea hanging on the walls. Riveria sat before the large desk, her posture dignified and composed, gazing calmly at the branch guild master, Lepart, sitting opposite her. Just by sitting there, she carried an air of dignity that could not be ignored. Regarding the man-eating flower on the lake yesterday, does Guildmaster Lepart truly have no clues? Riveria's voice carried a sense of pressure. I am very sorry, Lady Riveria. Lepart shook his head, his response flawless. We have heard absolutely no news regarding this. The lake has always been calm, and there have been no reports of anomalies. If it hadn't been for the fact that the members of the Loki Familia saw it with their own eyes yesterday, we wouldn't even have dared to believe such a thing existed. Riveria frowned slightly and continued to ask about several details indirectly, whether any ships had gone missing recently, whether any fishermen had reported abnormal currents or sounds, and whether the Adventurers Guild's monitoring system had experienced any abnormal fluctuations. Although Lepart answered them one by one, he was evasive in his speech, either claiming that the records are currently being organized or stating that that should be under the jurisdiction of the NJRR Familia, never touching upon any substantial points. In that case, will the town's Adventurers Guild organize an investigation? Riveria changed the question, her gaze still locked on the other person's expression. That is a matter for the NJRR Familia to worry about. Lepart spread his hands, washing his hands of the responsibility. The sea is their territory, our Adventurers Guild cannot manage that much. Instead of worrying about that, Lady Riveria. Lepart suddenly lowered his voice, his tone tinged with a hint of complaint. Can you Loki Familia do something about the Amazons coming from the sea? Those lunatics from Talskura don't even listen to reason, causing trouble all over the streets. They are bound to cause a huge problem sooner or later. Riveria's gaze turned cold. Wasn't their port entry permit something you, Guildmaster Lepart, personally approved? Upon hearing this, an expression of difficulty immediately appeared on Lepart's face. He sighed and spread his hands with a bitter smile. Theoretically, it was indeed approved by our Adventurers Guild. But Lady Riveria, the situation in Melon is somewhat complex. The autonomy here is jointly held by the local lord of the town, the NJRR Familia, and our Adventurers Guild branch. The lord refuses to give up full governing power, and our Adventurers Guild has no way to force it. Riveria nodded silently. She understood the power structure of Oreo. Under the instructions of the deity Aurenas, the Adventurers Guild actually primarily serves only as a supervisory and coordinating body. For instance, in Oreo, the usual public security and law enforcement powers belong to the Ganesha Familia, agriculture is controlled by the Demeter Familia, and top-tier familias like Loki and Freya also possess their own vast territories. But Melon is different. Since the departure of the Poseidon Familia years ago, there has been no first-rate major familia stationed here to manage it. The power vacuum led to the contention of various forces, ultimately forming the current complex situation where the Lord, the Adventurers Guild, and mid-sized familias check and balance each other. In a place like this, any party could potentially be engaging in unspeakable dealings in the shadows. The fact that those Amazons from the Battle Nation were able to enter the port smoothly was mainly because the local lord nodded and approved it. Lepart added as a final note, his tone carrying the implication of anyway, it has nothing to do with me. At the same time, on the east side of the town. After patrolling with Lafia, Luca arrived at the local lord's residence, which Alicia and Anki were responsible for investigating. This was a magnificent manor, with towering stone walls separating the entire residence from the outside world. The iron gate was engraved with intricate emblems, exuding a sense of keeping others at a distance. Inside the residence, a few exquisite annexes and neatly trimmed gardens were vaguely visible, looking in sharp contrast to the simple residential houses in the town. As soon as the two arrived outside the gate, they saw Alicia and Anki standing in front of the gate, both with very unpleasant expressions. Inside the gate opposite them, a burly old man was standing on the steps, pointing at their noses and cursing rudely. "You bunch of adventurers guild lackeys. Don't think you can run wild on my turf. Get lost. You are not welcome here." Luca frowned slightly and walked up. In this world, as long as one had a remotely normal brain, no one would dare say such things to the Loki Familia, which is openly the strongest in the world. Even if they didn't know them, upon hearing the name Loki Familia, ordinary people should know what that implies. This old man was either hopelessly stupid and knew nothing about outside intelligence, or he had some powerful backing, or he was hiding some secret that absolutely could not be discovered, which was why he was pretending to be so furious to drive them away. Luca ignored the old man's clamoring. He stood still in front of the steps and slightly relaxed his control over his perception. The next second, an invisible force of perception spread outward from him, enveloping the entire massive lord's residence. His consciousness penetrated the thick walls, passed through the exquisite floors, crossed the gorgeous decorations and furniture, and extended downward, reaching a hidden space deep underground. Here, he sensed a massive quantity of magic stones. The accumulation density of the magic stones far exceeded normal levels, far exceeding the legal storage limits of the Adventurers Guild. Luca withdrew his perception, his expression calm as water. He didn't bother wasting words with the old man suspected of being the Lord, instead turning directly to look at Anki, and gave an order in an unquestionable tone. "Anki, take people and blockade every entrance and exit of this residence. Do not let anyone in or out. Alicia, go to the basement of that annex in the southeast direction to check. If you encounter any obstruction, you are authorized to use force." "Yes, Lord Luca." The two women were slightly stunned, but then their spirits lifted, and they immediately took action. Anki blew a short whistle, and several female members who were hiding nearby immediately appeared, quickly dispersing to the surroundings of the residence and blocking all entrances and exits. Alicia, meanwhile, drew her sword and walked quickly toward the annex in the southeast direction. Hearing Luca accurately call out southeast direction and basement, without even the slightest deviation in direction, the old man, who had just been arrogant and aggressive, instantly turned pale. The face that had been flushed with anger lost all its color in an instant, becoming ashen. It was as if all the strength in his body had been drained, his originally straight back slumped down dejectedly. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something more, but found he couldn't say anything at all. In the end, he could only let out a sigh. "All right, now the obstacles are cleared." Luca walked up to the old man, looking down at him from above. "Explain properly, the prohibited magic stones in the basement, what exactly is the situation?" Chapter 63 Conflict, LDM, I'm already a corporate slave, so I can't guarantee one update a day. Please wait for more updates before reading. As noon approached, the sun scorched the cobblestone streets of Melon Harbor until they were slightly warm, and the sea breeze carried the aroma of grilled fish and the salty, fishy smell of the water. After gathering information, Ace Wallenstein and Line returned to the port rendezvous point. As soon as they approached the dock, Ace Wallenstein saw Alice squatting in front of a grilled fish stall, holding a skewer of charred, almost unrecognizable fish shape. What should have been a fresh fish now resembled a piece of charcoal just pulled from a fire, its surface covered with cracked lines. "Sister Alice, what are you doing here?" Ace Wallenstein stepped forward and asked with some confusion. "I'm wondering, why is the fish I grill always burnt?" Alice muttered to herself, her exquisitely beautiful face filled with frustration. She looked down at the string of carbonized material in her hand, her brows furrowed, as if pondering some ultimate question about life. Seeing Alice silently and sullenly puffing out her cheeks, Ace Wallenstein, unusually, displayed his emotional intelligence. She didn't dwell on the topic that hurt her pride. She remembered clearly that the last time Alice tried to cook, she accidentally blew up the boiler, and the billowing black smoke still lingered in her memory. She changed the subject, asking with some concern, "How are Tiona and Tioni? I heard they went to see the Callie clan last night." "They're both fine." Alice casually tossed away the charred fish, clapped her hands, and stood up, her face regaining its usual calm. "After being punched by Luca last night, Tioni is much calmer. They're currently conducting an investigation far from the Callie familia and won't be encountering those Amazons for the time being." Hearing this, Ace Wallenstein nodded in relief. At that moment, a burly man walked out from behind the stall. He was shirtless, his bronze skin glistening with sweat in the sunlight, and he wore a dark apron around his waist, clearly someone who made a living on the water year-round. When he saw Ace Wallenstein's signature blonde hair and golden eyes, a look of surprise flashed in his eyes. He then realized that the beautiful silver-haired girl squatting in front of the stall eating grilled fish was also a member of Loki familia. "This young lady has quite the appetite," the burly man laughed heartily, pointing to the several empty wooden buckets beside him. "She ate all the fish we caught today. In all my years, this is the first time I've ever seen a girl who can eat so much." Ace Wallenstein tilted his head slightly and sized up the big man. Seeing this, the big man continued to introduce himself. "My name is Rod, and I am the leader of Njord Familia." "My name is Alice." Alice nodded and sincerely praised, "Your grilled fish is really delicious. The cooking time is just right, the skin is crispy and the inside is tender, even better than the high-end restaurants in Orio." "Haha, thank you for the compliment, Miss Alice." Rod laughed heartily, wiping his rough hands on his apron. "We fishermen may not be the best fighters, but when it comes to grilling fish, there are few in the world who can match us. After all, we're on the boat every day, and fish are our life." Alice smiled slightly, a thoughtful glint in her golden eyes. Remembering the important matter Luca had entrusted to her, she asked, "Commander Rhodes, is this vast Lalag Lake all managed by your Njord familia?" Rhodes glanced at Ace Wallenstein, who was standing obediently beside him, with some surprise. The famous sword maiden, the blonde girl in Orio legends as powerful as a storm, was now standing quietly beside Alice like a docile younger sister, completely following the lead of the girl named Alice before her. Rhodes was secretly surprised, but he didn't ask any further questions. "Yes." Rhodes nodded, his tone filled with pride. "Lord Njrr is a very kind and generous god, so almost all the fishermen in this area have voluntarily joined his kin and sought his protection." Alice nodded and continued to ask, "When you go out to sea, how often do you encounter monsters? There must be quite a few dangerous things in this lake, right? Thanks to everyone's daily cleanup efforts, the monsters on the lake are almost gone." Rod patted his chest proudly. "We have patrol boats every day, and we deal with any monsters we find immediately. So, the fishermen near Melon have been very safe all these years." "Then, what about the man-eating flower? Have you ever seen it?" Ace Wallenstein suddenly asked from the side. Upon hearing the words man-eating flower, Rod's smile froze slightly. He paused for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one else was paying attention to their conversation before lowering his voice and replying, "To be honest, we have indeed seen the shadow of the man-eating flower underwater when we occasionally go out to sea. However, those monsters don't seem to be interested in us and have never attacked our ship." Alice nodded. "So how did you deal with it? With your combat strength, you probably couldn't handle a monster of that level, right? Judging by the strength of the dungeon monsters in this world, the man-eating flower is definitely a rather powerful monster." Alice didn't believe that a group of fishermen who were only good at fishing and had mediocre fighting skills could deal with such a monster. Rhodes made no attempt to hide anything. He pulled a brocade pouch from his robes, untied the string, and revealed some fine powder inside that glowed with a pale blue light. "Thanks to this magic powder, as long as we sprinkle it on the water around the ship, those monsters won't come near. We don't know the principle behind it, but it really works." Ace Wallenstein stared at the brocade pouch, a thoughtful glint in his eyes. She said softly, "As far as I know, the only person capable of making such large-scale monster-repelling items is Arario's all-powerful Asfi." The repellent powder she developed has an effect very similar to this description. Rhodes shook his head and resealed the pouch. That's beyond my knowledge. I've only heard Lord NJRR mention that this item was bought from Oreo. As for who made it, it's not appropriate for us nobody to ask too many questions. Ace Wallenstein frowned slightly, a sense of doubt rising in his heart. According to Rod, almost all the fishermen in the area use this powder, which means the consumption is enormous. Even Asfi, the genius prop master hailed as the all-powerful, couldn't possibly provide enough supplies to satisfy the entire town's fishing industry all by himself. There must be something else going on behind this. Just then, Line came running over, panting. Miss Ace. Miss Alice. Something terrible has happened. Line shouted anxiously, Tioni and those Amazons have gotten into a fight. It's happening on the street at the west end of town. Meanwhile, on another street in Melon, the atmosphere had plummeted to freezing point. Algana suspends a man in midair as if he were a chick. Her fingers gripped the man's collar tightly. The man's face was deathly pale, and his feet were off the ground as he struggled futilely in the air. Speaking in broken common tongue, her tone was chilling as she asked, "The look you gave me just now, did you want to fight me?" "I'm so sorry." The man's companion next to him was so frightened that his legs went weak. He bowed repeatedly and begged for forgiveness, his voice trembling with tears. He didn't mean it. It's just that you are so beautiful that he accidentally became mesmerized. Please forgive him. Beautiful? Algana chuckled, her smile tinged with disdain. She suddenly increased the pressure in her hand, squeezing the man's neck bones until they made a dangerous crackling sound. Algana sneered in broken, heavily accented common, "You lowly beast, do you think you're worthy to look at me? Stop." With a furious shout, a figure rushed from the other end of the street. Algana turned her head slightly and looked at Tioni, whose face was full of anger. She casually tossed the man, whose eyes had rolled back, aside like trash. The man fell to the ground with a muffled groan, and his companions quickly dragged him away. "Oh? Now you're even meddling in such lowly people's trivial matters?" Algana turned around, looking Tioni up and down with a provocative gaze. "Or are you taking this opportunity to provoke me?" She licked her lips, her eyes filled with undisguised fighting spirit. "I heard your current title is Angry Serpent?" "What a coincidence, the same as mine." Tioni's amber eyes flashed with a terrifying red light. "I'm not like you, a slayer who only knows how to kill." Before he finished speaking, Tioni had already crashed into him like a cannonball. The two men's fists collided violently in midair, producing a dull thud. The shockwave spread outwards, overturning stalls on both sides of the street. When Tiona, Alice, and Ace Wallenstein arrived at the scene after hearing the commotion, the middle of the street had already been reduced to ruins. The stone floor was riddled with several deep craters, the walls were covered with cracks and holes, and broken planks and rubble were scattered all over the ground. The two LV.6 Amazon warriors clashed wildly in the ruins like two raging beasts. Tioni and Algana were locked in a fierce battle, their collisions producing a deafening roar that caused surrounding buildings to collapse. Gravel flew in all directions, hitting the walls with a series of muffled thuds. The streets were deserted, the civilians had either fled or cowered in nearby buildings, trembling with fear. "Sister!" Tiona saw her sister struggling in battle, and anger flashed in her eyes. She hurriedly tried to step forward to help, but was blocked by a brown shadow. Back, an Amazon warrior also from Battle Nation, stood in front of Tiona with several companions. She stood there, relaxed yet exuding an aura that commanded respect. "Long time no see, Tiona," Back said casually. "We haven't even formally greeted each other yet. Get out of my way." Tiona frowned, and without further ado, threw a punch. She gathered her magic and unleashed a punch that ripped through the air with a shrill whistle. The two instantly clashed, the sounds of their fists and feet colliding echoing through the street. Seeing that the situation was completely out of control, Ace Wallenstein drew his desperate from his waist. She was about to rush through the crowd to help when she was stopped by a fair arm. Ace Wallenstein turned his head in confusion, looking at Alice. No need. Alice smiled faintly, her gaze fixed ahead. Luca had somehow appeared beside them. He looked at the chaotic battlefield ahead. It's good to let them vent their emotions. They've been suppressing them for too long, they need an outlet. Then, Luca turned her head and said to Alice beside her, speaking of which, the Amazon race really does resemble the monster girls from our region. Whether it's the strong-willed, warlike nature, the instinctive habits, or even the fact that their offspring are always female, they are exactly the same. Alice snorted coldly, her golden eyes flashing with disdain. Don't compare you's lovely subordinates to these barbarians. Monster girls, while also respecting strength, are not like Amazons, who cultivate warriors through this cruel, insidious process of mutual slaughter. At least they have loyalty and camaraderie among themselves, while these Amazons only see killing and conquest. The battle ahead has reached a fever pitch. The earth trembled, and the two figures moved swiftly through the ruins, their fists and feet exchanging dazzling sparks. Tioni's moves were ruthless and precise, fueled by years of suppressed rage, while Aldana was like a venomous snake, her movements unpredictable and cunning, always launching attacks from the most unexpected angles. Just then, out of the corner of Tioni's eye, he suddenly caught sight of a local little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, in the ruins at the edge of the street. She was wearing a tattered burlap dress and was sitting helplessly on the ground, crying loudly. Her face was covered in dust, and tears left 2 clear streaks on her cheeks. The shockwaves from their battle were about to reach that fragile life. Without the slightest hesitation, Tioni gritted her teeth and abandoned her defense, intending to withstand Aldana's full-force attack with her own body in exchange for a chance to change the battlefield. Why weren't you this kind when you killed Celesta? Pretending. Aldana, caught up in the battle, noticed the little girl, but all she saw was cruelty and contempt. Instead of holding back, she unleashed a powerful, murderous punch towards Tioni and the little girl, creating a white shockwave in the air. Boom! The violent force of the punches stirred up clouds of dust, and pebbles flew in all directions. However, the expected scene of carnage did not materialize. Before anyone could see clearly, Luca appeared as if teleporting, blocking Tioni and the little girl's path. He spread his fingers and caught Aldana's full-force punch with one palm. What? Aldana's pupils shrank, and the expression on her face instantly changed from cruel excitement to shock. She felt an irresistible resistance coming from her fist, and all her strength was silently swallowed up by this palm. Before she could react, Luca suddenly raised her right leg and delivered a clean and sharp side kick, striking Aldana hard in the abdomen. Bang! With a sickening thud, Aldana's body flew backward. One of Battle Nation's strongest warriors drew a long parabola in midair, crossing the entire street, passing the dock, and finally crashing heavily into the distant lake, splashing a huge spray of water dozens of meters high. The water splashed and refracted a brief rainbow in the sunlight before disappearing. The entire room fell silent. Luca retracted his leg, and then a tremendous aura was released from his body. Its imposing presence, like a tangible mountain, carries an invisible weight that irresistibly presses down on every Battle Nation. Amazon's shoulder. Back, who was fighting Tiona, and the Amazon warriors around her who were waiting for an opportunity, suddenly felt their bodies stiffen. Their muscles went out of control in an instant, as if they had been pressed firmly to the spot by an invisible giant hand. They were all rooted to the spot, unable to move even a finger. Luca stood in the center of the ruins, her azure eyes calmly sweeping over every Amazon present. His voice carried an unquestionable authority. I am not interested in your Amazonian customs, nor do I want to interfere, because I do not want to kill anyone. His gaze sharpened, and the temperature in the air seemed to drop several degrees. But if you dare to cause trouble here again, a cold glint flashed in Luca's eyes, all of you Amazons here today will stay in Melon. The air froze at that moment. The Amazon warriors who had been shouting and provoking just moments before all held their breath. Oh dear, what a terrible child. A petite figure appeared at the other end of the street. Callie, wearing a fanged mask, slowly emerged from the shadows. She glanced at Algana, who was still struggling on the surface of the sea and trying to swim to the shore, and then took a deep look at Luca, who was exuding a terrifying aura. The look in those eyes hidden behind the mask became complicated. She clapped her hands, breaking the suffocating silence. "All right, that's enough of this farce. We have important things to do. Kids, let's go." She turned and walked toward the port. The Amazon warriors, as if granted a pardon, put away their weapons and followed her away in single file. Chapter 64. I'll deal with Loki. Familia. Night fell again in Melon. The sea breeze howled outside the window, whipping up waves that crashed against the rocks on the shore. The town's lights flickered sporadically in the darkness, echoing the lights of the fishing boats swaying on the distant lake. However, beneath this seemingly tranquil night, a storm is brewing. In the largest room of the hotel, Loki Familia's investigation team held another operational meeting. A hand-drawn map of Melon was spread out on the wall, with several key locations marked in charcoal: the Lord's Manor, the Guild Branch, the dock area, and the seal point at the bottom of the lake. Luca sat in the main seat, his gaze sweeping over everyone present. He began by asking, "How are Tiona and Tioni doing?" Lafia stood by the table, his hands clasped in front of him, his face filled with worry. Both of them are in a bad mood, especially Miss Tioni. Ever since she had a fight with Algana during the day, she has locked herself in her room and hasn't said a word. I've knocked on the door a few times, but she hasn't responded. She paused, her tone softening slightly. However, Miss Ace is inside looking after them right now, so they should be fine. Although Miss Ace doesn't talk much, her quiet presence is often more calming than any words. Luca nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Although Ace Wallenstein is usually a bit naive, when it comes to comforting his companions, pure care and companionship are often more effective than any grand principles. He believed that Ace Wallenstein could stabilize their emotions. "All right, let's get down to business." Luca reached out and tapped lightly on the table, drawing everyone's attention back to the main topic. He summarized the findings of everyone's individual investigations that day. First, there's the fishermen. According to Alice and Ace Wallenstein's contact, the fishermen carry a magical powder with them when they go out to sea. They can drive away monsters by sprinkling it on the water. This powder is said to have been obtained by the god Njrr from the local lords and distributed to them. He turned to look at Alice, who was leaning against the window, idly fiddling with a strand of hair. She nodded in confirmation. Secondly, there's the guild. Luca's gaze shifted to Riveria. According to Riveria's assessment, the Melon Branch Guild leader, Repat, has a very subtle attitude. On one hand, he's dissatisfied with Melon's current power distribution and even intentionally tries to steer our Loki Familia against the Lord and Njrr. He's been hinting that there's some kind of shady collusion between the Lord and Njrr. But on the other hand, he seems indifferent to the man-eating flower attack that was brought to the forefront yesterday, and you could even say he's deliberately downplaying it. Luca tapped her finger on the table. This means that Repat wants to use us to break Melon's existing power balance, but he doesn't want us to investigate the truth about the man-eating flower. Finally, there's the Lord's side. Luca took a small cloth bag from the pouch at her waist and threw it on the table. This afternoon, we found a large quantity of prohibited magic stones, far exceeding the guild's regulations, as well as these processed and bagged magic stone powders in the basement of the Lord's mansion. Huh? Lion leaned closer to examine it closely. She dipped her finger in the powder, sniffed it, and then covered her mouth in surprise. This is exactly the same as the magic powder that fishermen use to ward off monsters. The smell, the texture, even the luster are exactly the same. There are just some impurities mixed in. Angie added from the side, using her fingers to brush away the powder and pick out a few tiny impurities. These should be stone chips that were deliberately mixed in during the grinding process. Luca nodded affirmatively. That's right. Combining these three clues, the outline of the matter becomes very clear. He stood up, walked to the map hanging on the wall, and drew a circle on the lake with his finger. Man-eating flowers lurk in the waters around Melon Town. These man-eating flowers devoured the monsters that originally lived in the waters, which explains why the fishermen say, "We haven't seen any monsters on the lake for a long time." It's not that the monsters disappeared, but that they were all eaten up by the man-eating flowers. He turned around, his gaze sweeping over everyone present. The reason the fishermen are able to go out to sea safely is not because of any exorcism magic, but because of these powders made from crushed magic stones. Man-eating flowers like to devour magic stones. When fishermen sprinkle magic stone powder, it's like feeding them. Whenever a man-eating flower appears, it will prioritize eating the magic stone powder sprinkled on the water's surface and will naturally not attack the ships. So that's how it is. The girls present felt a chill run down their spines. This method of using monster habits to maintain a superficial peace is like walking a tightrope. Once the supply of magic stone powder runs out, or the man-eating flower's appetite grows, those fishermen will become the first victims. Luca turned to look at Loki, who had been silent all along. Loki was sitting in a chair in the corner, legs crossed, arms folded over her chest. "Loki, what's the deal with NJRR himself? What did you discover after your encounter with him today?" Hearing Luca's question, Loki scratched his red hair in frustration and said in a complicated tone, "We tried to get information out of him today, but that guy clearly knows we have the authority to see through lies, yet he kept dodging the question when we talked to him and didn't dare to answer our questions directly." Loki slammed his hand on the armrest, his voice filled with anger. "That NJRR guy, there's definitely something wrong with him." Loki then emphasized, "But although NJRR concealed the truth, he is definitely not the mastermind. We've known him for so many years, and he's a kind-hearted person to the core. He would rather suffer himself than do anything bad. If he was involved, he was either forced into it or used." Seeing Loki's serious expression, Luca nodded slightly. "Since you put it that way, let's exclude him from the mastermind for now. But his failure to report what he knew is still a problem." A brief silence fell over the room, with the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks, mingling with the sobbing of the night wind as it swept through the streets. Meanwhile, in a luxurious room on the other side of Melon. This is a room several times more luxurious than a hotel room, with brightly colored brocades hanging on the walls, soft handmade carpets on the floor, and the air filled with the aroma of expensive spices. From the window, you can see the harbor at night, with lights reflected on the lake like scattered stars. Battle Nation's chief god, Kali, was lounging on a deckchair covered with animal hides, which were clearly the fur of some large, ferocious beast, with sharp claws still remaining at the tips of its claws. Behind her stood Back and Algana, whose body was still covered in bruises. Squeak. The door was pushed open, and a rich, almost intoxicating fragrance wafted into the room. A goddess with brown skin and revealing clothes walked in, surrounded by a group of Amazons. She was draped only in a few thin, gossamer thin veils, her graceful figure appearing and disappearing beneath the fabric, her natural allure enough to steal the attention of everyone present. Her face was covered by a thin veil, revealing only a pair of mesmerizing and deep purple eyes. Anyone who was looked at by those eyes would willingly fall into their trap. She is Ishtar, the goddess of beauty and the absolute ruler of the Oreo Red Light District. "When I received the letter you sent saying you wanted to defeat Freya Familia, I thought you were joking," Kali said. "I never expected you to be serious, Ishtar." "Hee hee hee," Ishtar let out a chilling laugh, a cold glint flashing in her purple eyes. "The gift I'm giving you is full of sincerity." She narrowed her eyes slightly, glancing at the two people behind Kali. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the bruises on Algana's body, a faint, mocking smile playing on her lips. "To completely defeat that high and mighty bitch Freya, to make her fall from grace into the mire, I'm willing to use any means necessary. However," she then changed the subject, "you bunch of beasts who only know how to fight, can you really do what I ask you to do? Don't just act recklessly and ruin the whole plan." Kali didn't care about the disdain and chuckled lightly. She slowly sat up and looked directly at Ishtar. "Wherever there is fighting, wherever there is bloodshed, the warriors of Talskura will join in. It's our instinct. You don't need to teach us how to fight, you just need to tell us who to tear apart." Then, Callie changed the subject, her tone becoming contemptuous. But it's you guys. With those few weaklings behind you who've never seen blood, even if we're included, do you really think you can defeat the invincible Freya Familia? Otter alone could wipe out your entire clan. Ishtar's eyes turned cold, a chill flashing across her beautiful face, but she quickly regained her confident sneer. She turned slightly to the side, revealing a figure behind her whose face was completely covered by a wide hood. The wide hood covered most of her face, with only a glimpse of her fair chin visible. Most strikingly, a fluffy golden tail was faintly visible at the edge of the hood. You don't need to worry about that, Ishtar said smugly. I have a backup plan. You just need to do your own thing and wait for the right time to cooperate with me. Callie's gaze fell on the hooded Foxian, and she nodded thoughtfully. A moment later, Callie sat up straight, raised a finger, and said in a more serious tone, in that case, I have one more condition. If you don't agree to this, the deal is off. Ishtar frowned, a hint of displeasure flashing in her eyes. What are your conditions? I've already shown you enough sincerity, don't push your luck. There are 2 of my former children in this town now. Callie ignored her displeasure. Tiona and Tioni, they were once members of my clan, and later came to Oreo. If you help me take them back and bring them back to Talskura, I will agree to join your plan and help you deal with Freya. Ishtar's expression changed drastically. She looked at Callie as if she were crazy. Are you insane? At this critical moment, you want me to provoke Loki Familia? She knew very well that Tiona and Tioni were now the core fighting force of Loki Familia, not to mention that they brought that super rookie with them to Melon this time, whose rumors were so outrageous that she couldn't believe it. If she were to make a move against Loki Familia now, it would be like lighting a fuse that she didn't want to light yet. Callie shrugged, her tone full of mockery. What? You don't even dare to deal with half of Loki Familia, yet you dare to dream of defeating Freya Familia, who is on par with her. If this is your courage, then I don't think our cooperation is necessary. She made a move to get up and see her out. Shut up. Ishtar's face contorted instantly when her sore spot was touched. Jealousy and hatred towards Freya ultimately overcame her reason. With a sudden wave of her hand, she swept a teacup off the table next to her, and said through gritted teeth, enunciating each word clearly. I promise you. I'll help you hold off Loki Familia's main force. As for those 2 Amazons, you can try to catch them yourself. But I'm warning you, if you mess up my plan, I'll make you regret ever being born. Callie lay back down on the leather chair with satisfaction. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. She reached out and gently stroked the fawn mask on her face. I, as the mother, will take care of the children's affairs. Chapter 65 Amazon Sisters. Chapter 65 Amazon Sisters. The sea breeze squeezed in through the cracks in the window, carrying a salty and fishy smell, making the oil lamps in the corridor flicker. The nights in Melon are much quieter than in Oreo, with the creaking of cables coming from the distant dock like the pounding of an uneasy heart. Tioni sheathed the dagger back into its scabbard at his waist and fastened the last buckle on his leather armor. She pushed the door open, making sure to keep it as quiet as possible, but it still made a soft sound. She paused for a moment, listened to the sounds from next door, but there was no response. Elder sister. Tioni's feet were rooted to the spot. At the end of the corridor, Tiona leaned against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest, and stood there for an unknown amount of time. The hallway was poorly lit, but Tioni could see her sister's expression, the one where she was most at a loss for what to do, quietly watching you. Where are you going? Tiona asked. Tioni did not answer. Luca said it. Tiona straightened up from against the wall. Don't go alone. Especially not at a time like this. I know he said that. And you? Tioni took something out of his inner pocket and handed it to his sister. It was a badge from Loki Familia, the clown design of which they were very familiar with. They each received one on the day they joined the group, and Tiona still treasures hers, keeping it under her pillow. But the one Tioni has is a little different. The clown's face had been carved with a knife. Tiona took it and examined it from all angles, her fingers tracing the scratches as her brows furrowed deeper and deeper. Found it under your pillow, Tioni said. I don't recognize the technique, but Algana does. To be precise, that's exactly what she did. Algana. The Kali clan has arrived in Melon, Tioni said, leaning against the windowsill in the corridor. This badge is their challenge. They're after the two of us. Tiona remained silent for a moment. Then we'll tell Luca, she said. No. Elder sister. Tell Luca, and then what? Tioni interrupted her. Let him go beat up Algana? Beat up the entire Kali clan? He can do it. I know he can. Wouldn't that solve the problem? Tiona. Tioni looked into her eyes. We are the Amazons. After those 3 words were spoken, the corridor remained quiet for a long time. Amazons from Telskura, Tioni said, hiding behind men in front of their own people. What do you think Algana will think of us? What will Kali think of us? I don't care what they think. I don't care. Tioni's voice suddenly lowered. Luca woke me up yesterday. I did get stuck in a rut, and I was really struggling with myself. But while he helped me, I can't take him for granted as a shield. She raised her head. If I have to let others bear my fate, then the hand that holds the knife is empty. Tiona stared at her sister for a long time. She lowered her head and stuffed the badge into her pocket. I knew you'd say that. Her voice was slightly nasal. You're always like this. And you. Wait a minute, I need to change my boots. Tiona turned and headed towards her room, then stopped after a couple of steps. I won't stop you. But I'm going with you. No discussion about that. Tioni didn't say anything, she watched her sister's figure disappear around the corner of the corridor. Melon's harbor is a different place at night. The daytime workers loading and unloading goods and the hawkers shouting have all disappeared, leaving only an empty pier, wooden stakes blackened by seawater, and a few fishing boats moored. The moonlight was pressed down overhead by thick clouds, occasionally letting out a small patch that shone on the stone slabs of the harbor, like a shattered mirror. Algana stood at the far end of a pier. She is better than Tioni. She appeared taller and stronger in remembrance, her weapon slung across her back, her hands hanging loosely at her sides, her posture casual. They're here. Algana smiled as she saw the 2 sisters approaching. Tioni placed his hand on the knife handle, his steps unwavering. Algana didn't look at her, her gaze passed over Tioni and landed on Tiona, then she pointed in a direction. You, she said to Tiona, go over there. Tiona paused for a moment. Back is waiting for you over there, Algana added. Tioni shook his head at his sister. Tiona turned and walked in the direction Algana pointed. Algana watched Tiona walk away, then turned around and jumped onto the boat moored behind her. She drew a short knife from her waist and cut the cable in one stroke. Come up, she said to Tioni. Tioni jumped onto the boat, which rocked slightly as the seawater lapped against the hull with a dull thud. Without the tethering of the mooring ropes, the boat began to drift slowly out to sea with the receding tide. Algana walked to the bow of the ship, sheathed her dagger, and stretched her neck. You know the rules, she said. Regardless of who survives tonight, the one who lives goes back to Telskura. Even a guy like you who only knows how to use his fists is now negotiating, Tioni said. Has the sun risen in the west over Telskura? Enough with the nonsense. Tiona walked along the coastline for more than 10 minutes. The rock face grew steeper and steeper, and the pebbles underfoot were wet and slippery from the seawater. Then a cave came into view. The entrance to the cave was small, barely enough for one person to squeeze through sideways, but once inside, the space quickly opened up. Water seeped from the rock walls, and the ground beneath your feet was soft sand and broken bones. She went very deep. The cave suddenly widened after a certain corner, and a crack appeared in the rock above, allowing moonlight to leak through and illuminate a clearing in the middle. Kali sat there. The main god of battle nation sat cross-legged on a platform made of bones and rubble, his posture relaxed, one hand supporting his chin. Back emerged from the shadows on the right. Tiona paused for a moment when she saw her. Everyone's here. Callie's voice came from behind the mask. Let's begin. Tiana clenched her fists slightly. Can we not fight? She knew the answer when she said that, but she felt she couldn't get past herself if she didn't ask. Bak didn't speak, his silence was the answer. What's wrong? Callie asked. Have you become more timid after being away for a few years? Or has life in Oreo become too comfortable, and you've forgotten what Telskura is like? Tiana shook her head. Telskura. The name means place of trials in common, but the people who live there call it another name, blood pit. Tiana remembers something that happened when she was 4 years old. That day, she was walking barefoot on the edge of the training field, her feet covered in mud mixed with blood. There were several corpses piled up by the roadside. They were eliminated trainees, the youngest of whom looked even younger than her. She no longer remembers the corpse's face, but she remembers not being afraid at the time. This is what scares her the most. One day, she was rummaging through the burial pit on the back mountain when she found half a piece of paper. The paper was half rotten and had writing on it that she couldn't understand. She tucked the half sheet of paper into her bosom and ran to find Bak. What is this? What does it say on it? Bak didn't know common tongue either. She held the half sheet of paper, turning it over and over for a long time, before finally frowning and saying, wait. Then Bak ran away. Bak went to Callie, and Callie taught her. I don't know what my mindset was, maybe I was bored, or maybe I found it interesting. After learning the common language, Bak found an evening and sat with Tiona on the stone steps behind the training ground. The half sheet of paper contained a story, an adventurer who ventured into dungeon, survived countless near-death experiences, and finally defeated the monster. The writing was rough, probably jotted down by a passing merchant, and the paper was stained with blood. Batch's pronunciation was halting, she skipped over some words she didn't know, and she misunderstood some sentences, so she pronounced them in her own way. Then the adventurer said, I'm not here to die, I'm here to win. Tiona listened intently. It wasn't because the story itself was particularly exciting, but because at that moment, in Telskura, where she saw blood and death every day, someone sat next to her and told her a story about winning in an awkward voice. It's not about winning by stepping over the corpses of others to survive, but about protecting the important people and then walking back with dignity. Later, the half sheet of paper rotted, but Tiona always remembered Batch's voice when he read the story. That was one of the best evenings she ever spent in Telskura. I shouldn't have read those things to you when you were little. Batch's voice brought Tiona back to reality. She stood at the edge of the moonlight, her gaze towards Tiona calm. Tiona carefully put away her memories and swallowed hard. Elnia, she said, did you kill her? Ernia, their former training and playing partner in Telskura, is 2 years younger than Bak. She has a scar on her left arm from a lion bite and a canine tooth that shows when she smiles. Bak said. Algana killed Bellas, Bak said in a flat tone. I killed Elnia. Using their experience points, we leveled up to LV.6. Tiona's fingers were trembling. So you're going to kill me next? Yes, Bak said, your experience points are best suited for me. Tiona closed her eyes. She remembered Ernia's smiling face, the way Berna's always shared her food with them, the evenings on the stone steps, and Batch's stumbling voice. She opened her eyes. Then let's go, she said. Bak moved. Her speed is faster than Tiona's. The speed in remembrance was several levels faster, the ground exploded beneath her feet, sending debris flying and the sound of fists slicing through the air was sharp and piercing. Tiona dodged to the side and parried with a cross-shaped block, but Batch's second attack followed immediately, making Tiona's arms go numb and her feet slide several meters off the ground. She gritted her teeth, planted her feet firmly in the ground, and swung a backhand strike at Batch's ribs. Bak didn't dodge, Tiona's finger sliced through her leather armor, drawing a line of blood on her side. It's all right, she said, a bit better than in Telskura. You too, Tiona said, panting. Hotel. Ace Wallenstein couldn't sleep. She turned over for the third time, kicking the pillow to the foot of the bed, and the blanket was wrapped up in a ball around her legs. She sat up, somewhat worried about Tiona and Tioni. This thought started when the two people at dinner started acting strangely in the afternoon. Tioni became less talkative, and Tiona's smile seemed a bit fake. She put on a coat, slipped on her slippers, walked to Tiona and Tioni's door, and knocked 3 times. No one answered. I pushed open the door. Everything inside was neat and tidy, but no one was there. Ace Wallenstein stood in the empty room, blinked twice, then walked to the window and leaned out. Melon's night is dark, but Ace Wallenstein is an eye of LV.6. She could make out the outlines of monsters in the depths of dungeon by the faint phosphorescence. The darkness had little effect on her than daytime. She saw a ship leaving the dock in the direction of the port. Looking closer, there were 2 figures on the deck. Ace Wallenstein's pupils contracted, and without even bothering to put on his slippers properly, he ran out of the room barefoot. Riveria's door opened after she knocked 5 times. The elven vice-captain, wearing a bathrobe and with her hair down, looked completely bewildered. Are you sure it's them? Sure. Riveria didn't ask any more questions. Go find Luca, she said. This was her first reaction as the vice-captain. With Luca around, things would be simple. She pushed open Luca's door. The room was lit, and a person was sitting on the sofa. Alice sat on the corner of the sofa with her legs crossed, holding a book in her hands. She was reading an interesting page, and the corners of her mouth were curved into a smile. She glanced up at Riveria, then looked back at her book. Alice, where's Luca? Riveria asked. They went out. Alice turned a page. About half an hour ago. Where did you go? He didn't say. Riveria stood at the door, remained silent for a few seconds, and walked out of the corridor, her steps slower than when she came in. Luca has already gone out. Half an hour ago, before Tiona and Tioni had even set off, he had already sensed something and acted in advance before the 2 sisters left the hotel. She felt much relieved. But Ace Wallenstein's heart was still hanging in suspense. Before Riveria came out, Ace Wallenstein ran out of the hotel with only half of her coat on, her long golden hair flying wildly in the sea breeze. She could see the direction of the port clearly. The ship was drifting out to sea, but not too far. If she rushed there now, perhaps she could still find a way to get there. When she ran to the harbor pier, the stone slabs under her feet suddenly shook. The vibrations came from beneath the water's surface. The harbor's waters were initially calm, with only occasional ripples, but the moment Ace Wallenstein stepped onto the pier, the surface began to churn dramatically. First, bubbles rose to the surface, then murky green water appeared, and then a man-eating flower emerged from underwater. This isn't over yet. After the first flower came the second, the third, and the fourth. As if by prior arrangement, they burst out of the water simultaneously from all directions of the harbor, splashing water onto the wooden piles of the pier and turning the entire harbor into a boiling pot of water. The man-eating flower closest to her was already lunging at her. After its roots were pulled out of the water, it was able to move on land. More than a dozen roots supported the ground like octopus tentacles, moving much faster than expected. Ace Wallenstein drew his sword. The sound of desperate being drawn was very soft, almost drowned out by the noise of man-eating flower, but the blue light that shone on the blade drew a clear arc in the night. With a single sword stroke, the man-eating flower was sliced in half diagonally from its flower head to its stem. The second flower behind me has already pounced on it. Ace Wallenstein sidestepped the attack on the flower, then thrust her sword into the heart of the flower with a backhand stroke. The tip of the sword pierced through the back wall of the flower, and with a twist, she shredded the entire flower from the inside. The third flower. The fourth flower. The fifth flower. They had no coordination, no tactics, they just pounced on each other one after another based on instinct. The airflow wrapped around the blade became dense and sharp. Before the man-eating flower could even touch the blade, its stem was already sliced open by the wind blade and fell down like wheat being harvested. About a minute later, the port returned to calm. She looked up, and the ship had become a blurry black dot on the sea, almost blending into the dark water and sky beneath the clouds. We can't catch up. Ace Wallenstein gripped his sword, biting his lip, hesitating whether to jump into the sea and swim across. When a bell rang. It echoed in the night sky for several seconds, and before the last note faded away, Ace Wallenstein felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Then she heard the sound of the wind. The sound of something huge cutting through the air as it moves at high speed. Ace Wallenstein turned and raised his sword. A huge dark shadow rushed out from behind the containers on the side of the pier. That thing was so big that it was hard to believe it could move so fast. It was like a mountain of flesh with legs, wrapped in an exaggeratedly deformed full-body suit of armor, with fat bulging out from the seams of the armor. Its face was squeezed into the gap of the helmet, its two small eyes were sunken into its flesh, and its mouth was as big as a slit. Quack quack quack. You're a defeated opponent. It cried out, its voice rough and hoarse, as if it had poured half a mouthful of water down its throat while speaking. Today is your death day. Quack quack. A battle axe, larger than half of Ace Wallenstein's body, was swung by him with one hand and chopped down from above. Jamir? Ace Wallenstein tilted his head upon seeing this size. Freni Jamil. Leader of the Ishtar Familia. But these thoughts flashed through his mind for less than half a second before the battle axe was already above his head. Ace Wallenstein held his sword with both hands and parried upwards. Boom! The instant the sword and axe clashed, a large section of the stone slab beneath her feet shattered, cracks spreading outwards like a spiderweb for 4 or 5 meters. The impact caused her knees to buckle. But that one move was enough to shock her. Freni is LV.5, Ace Wallenstein is LV.6, but the power of that attack just now. That's not LV.5, Ace Wallenstein looked up at the face in front of him, distorted by the helmet. Freni grinned, drool dripping from the corner of her mouth, her small eyes filled with smugness and madness. How is it? She squawked. Isn't it heavy? This is power I finally managed to acquire. Squeak squeak squeak. She raised her battle axe, preparing for a second strike. Ace Wallenstein adjusted her grip on the sword, her expression had returned to calm, and there was no sign of wavering in her golden eyes. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.